Welcome, everyone, to the TV Lovers Podcast, the podcast where we apply everyday communication theories to some of your favorite TV shows. It is our duty to police TV shows where communication theories are lost in media. To ensure everyone is aware of how these shows ignore these theories, we're going to bring them to justice. I'm your host, Antonio, and alongside my peers Kaylee, Jarrett, and Nico, we'd like to welcome you to today's show. And without wasting any more time, let's jump right into some of our favorite theories. So, Kaylee, I see here in my notes you decided to discuss the uncertainty reduction theory. How do you feel like this theory applies to media today?
Hi, Antonio. Thank you so much for having me on. I believe media is portraying miscommunication and assumptions more and more as people continue to crave dramatic TV shows. It seems like no matter what people watch nowadays, you're going to see some kind of miscommunication or assumption that makes viewers believe this is the norm. Uncertainty is going to happen in every relationship, but it's the way it's handled that is important and determines how healthy communication is going forward. Chuck Berger created the uncertainty reduction theory, which says that in relationships, especially newer relationships, there's going to be uncertainty, which is seen as negative. A person must get to know the other person in order to reduce this uncertainty. To do this, you must communicate. Communication is key. So, in television shows, when we see uncertainty shown in relationships, the information seeking path the characters often take is unhealthy. Sometimes they do not take an information seeking path at all, and they just skip to assuming the worst.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Is there a specific example where you observed this happening?
Yes, absolutely. You could probably find examples of miscommunication and assumptions portrayed in every TV show you watch. But a popular example in a very popular TV show where uncertainty appears in a relationship, assumptions are made, and it leads to disaster is in the TV show Friends. When Ross and Rachel are dating, but they've been having some communication issues and it results in tension. Rachel decides that they should take a break from this relationship. This leaves Ross feeling uncertainty in how to proceed, and he makes the assumption that they're not going to continue dating. He then decides to spend time with another girl, and when Rachel finds out, she's heartbroken and calls him a cheater because in her mind they were still dating. The miscommunication and assumptions portrayed in this episode caused controversy among viewers as some supported Ross, some supported Rachel. Ross made an unhealthy communication choice by not discussing with Rachel the uncertainty he felt, and yet some viewers still stood by Ross in this episode. This could lead to people making similar communication choices in real life relationships. This is a clear example of how assumptions and miscommunications can negatively impact real life relationships.
Ah, one of the most popular TV shows ever created. It's funny how people gravitate towards shows that appeal to everyday life. How do you suggest the media resolve this issue?
Yes, Antonio, I definitely agree with you. I think people love TV shows that relate to them. But this doesn't mean we should copy the communication patterns we watch in these fictional shows. I believe there's a couple possible solutions to this problem. I think the obvious one would be portraying healthier communication patterns in TV shows. And yes, I do acknowledge conflict is necessary for TV, but there's also many ways it can be portrayed that still shows healthy communication at the core. I think it's important that parents teach their kids early on that what's shown in media is often exaggerated, and their communication should not be inspired by the unhealthy patterns we see. I think it's also important that you teach that you should always strive for honesty and show respect and consideration for others. Since removing all the unhealthy communication portrayed in TV is very unlikely, These are some simple ways you and others around you can make sure the media is not impacting your communication patterns in your real life relationships.
Wonderful observations, Kaylee. To switch things up a little bit, let's go to Nico. I noticed that you chose to concentrate on the social identity theory for this portion of the assignment. Could you provide listeners with an explanation of the social identity theory?
Absolutely. Social identity theory explains that a big part of how we see ourselves comes from the groups we belong to, whether those groups are based on hobbies, sports team, cultural background, or even types of social clinic we fit into. Our sense of identity becomes connected to these groups. And once that happens, we naturally begin to favor the group we are part of, known as the in group, while viewing others or the out groups more critically. Instead of evaluating each person based on their individual traits, we make assumptions about them simply because of the group they are associated with. This shortcut in thinking can lead to miscommunication, stereotyping, and inaccurate judgments about others before any real interaction happens. When the midst becomes normal, it creates individual barriers to forming meaningful relationships. People start interacting through labels instead of genuine courage. For example, if someone is known as an athlete, a nerd, or a theater kid, others might assume they know everything about that person without even talking to them. They may assume that the athlete is unintelligent, the smart kid is antisocial, or the theater kid is dramatic, even when those assumptions have no basis in reality. These stereotypes limit how people communicate and strip away opportunities for authentic understanding.
So basically, what you're saying is we think we know someone just because of a group they're associated with?
Exactly, Antonio. And the media reinforces this constantly. Many shows and movies rely on groups-based labels as a quick way to create conflict and drama. Characters are placed into predictable categories: athletes, misfits, popular students, rebels, and the audience is expected to accept those labels without question. In Mean Girls, for instance, students immediately categorize each other in social groups, like the plastic, the jocks, or the mathletes. And those labels indicate how they treat one another. They don't ask questions or get to know people individually. They rely solely on the group stereotype. The problem is that viewers internalize these patterns. When they see characters behaving this way repeatedly, they begin to assume that such labels is a normal or acceptable in real life. The more media promotes these simplified groups identities, the more people start using them outside the screen. Real-world communication becomes filtered through assumptions rather than open dialogue. If the media, instead of portrayed characters who challenge stereotypes, bridges social divides, and communicate with patience and sincerity, audience might adopt those healthier habits. Seeing characters ask genuine questions, show curiosity, and connect beyond labels would encourage viewers to do the same. It would help people recognize that identities are complex and that belong to a group does not define someone's entire personality.
That definitely explains a lot of the tension we see in these shows.
Absolutely. Social identity theory does not just describe how a group forms, it reveals why division feels so intense in media. When characters define themselves and others by labels, conflict becomes more unavoidable. Understanding this theory helps us recognize that the drama we see on screen isn't just about personal differences, it is about the way characters are treated both by each other and by the media to stop communicating as individuals.
Very well said. Social identity theory really helps explain why TV drama feels so divided. Hey Jarrett, why don't you explain the standpoint theory to everyone listening at home, just to give them an idea of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that's great. I think that standpoint theory is essentially the idea that the way that we view things or the voice that we have is based on our position and power in society. Like each standpoint is going to be based on things like race, gender, class, age, and especially even the power that we hold within our own relationships. It also implies the idea that those who hold less power actually will see things in a more rounded viewpoint, mainly because they're going to see things from their own viewpoint, and they're also going to see the more dominant standpoint, while the group that holds that power, or the dominant group here, is only going to see their viewpoint. I think that TV constantly provides us with a perfect lens into this theory, mainly because we see characters that are truly living in one environment, that we are shown, and we might see it from all aspects, but they're going to each interpret that through different standpoints.
And which TV show do you feel best exemplifies this theory?
Yeah, I think that The Office is actually a really good example of this. It truly nails on this standpoint theory.
Great choice. Another great show with a huge following. How do you feel this TV show exemplifies this theory?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at Michael Scott, who's the manager at Dunder Mifflin, which is the company in the show The Office, he operates constantly from a true position of power as the manager. He thinks that he claims he's the world's best boss, and he constantly assumes that all of his jokes that he's making are harmless, and he believes all of his employees are having as much fun as he is, as long as he's having fun, right? And normally when we see somebody like this who's holding a position of power, they tend to lack a certain awareness of those that are around them, and not in an intentional sense, but it's because they don't really share the same experience as them, and they simply don't see things like the others around them do.
That's a really great point, Jarrett. The Office is often seen as a comedy, but the miscommunication and assumptions portrayed in the show can negatively impact others and even influence how we interpret real life relationships. Jarrett, would you have any suggestions for how the media could make adjustments to help address this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of ways that media could change and make adjustments to kind of reduce the assumptions and miscommunications that we see, especially in shows like The Office. I think one of the biggest issues that we see in sitcoms and comedies are often normalizing these unhealthy communication aspects, mainly for the sake of humor. While most viewers can kind of tell that it's exaggerated, constant exposure to this will still end up shaping how we interpret real life interactions. So I think the first thing that media could start to work on is to really build in more of these moments of perspective taking. When we look at standpoint theory, it reminds us that people are going to communicate based on their lived experiences and from their social positions. So when we look at The Office, we usually see things from Michael or maybe Jim's perspective, but we're ever really going to see anything from the standpoint from like Stanley or Angela or Toby or more of these background characters who don't play a massive role in there. I think that if shows were to make more intentional spaces from multiple viewpoints, audiences would be able to get a better understanding of why certain characters act the way they do, instead of just assuming that someone has the correct interpretation. I think that that alone is going to reduce the tendency for people to make quicker judgments in real life. I think another thing that could be done is to have a more common showing of what healthier communication models look like, and you can do that without losing humor. I think, for example, like a character could still end up making a mistake or misreading a situation, but the resolution in that could involve actual clarification or accountability, instead of just playing it off as a joke. I think that The humor doesn't have to constantly come from dysfunction, especially in a workplace setting all the time. I think that it can also come from growth or awkward honesty or even just learning experiences more so than making fun of people or dysfunction. I think that media could also highlight consequences more realistically. When we look at The Office, we see things that Michael does, and his miscommunication rarely has long-term effects, and things are normally just kind of blow over either the next episode or that same episode. But if this stuff was to happen in a real workplace, it would definitely have these long-term effects. So I think that showing minor consequences like someone addressing issues or even just having a small reflective moment will help audiences be able to better understand that miscommunication isn't always harmless and can always be blown off super easily. Finally, I think that representation really matters. I think that when writers will start to include a bigger range of characters with their different backgrounds, identities, even communication styles, I think that viewers constantly getting exposed to this too many different standpoints. I think that diversity is naturally going to challenge these assumptions, and it'll teach people that communication isn't like a one size fits all thing. I think overall, I mean, the goal isn't to make comedy serious or to have them lose their humor. It's just to make them more balanced. If the media could show more accurate, diverse, and reflective communication, I think it can still be entertaining, but give viewers healthier expectations for real life relationships and experiences.
That's a great explanation. I definitely agree with what you're saying. Let's recap today's episode, shall we? Kaylee started off strong discussing the use of the uncertainty reduction theory in Friends and how assumptions the characters make due to lack of communication has become glamorized. We then shift to Nico, who discussed the social identity theory and how the show Mean Girls portrays in-groups versus out-groups. Lastly, we go to Jarrett discussing the standpoint theory in The Office, discussing how scenes from the show are interpreted due to character standpoints. And on that note, everybody, that is all the time we have for today. So, on behalf of everyone here at this TV Lovers podcast, stay theorizing.